We're live.
Right.
Good evening, everyone. I want to say thank you and welcome to our fourth session of Generational Wealth being brought to you by the Baton Rouge Sigma Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta. My name is Shai Joseph Franklin, and I am the president of Baton Rouge Sigma, where I lead roughly 300 women in our community doing public service. And one of our public service ventures is economic development. I want to say thank you so much for being able to tune in from wherever you are, far and near. We have a very special treat for you being led by our committee chairpersons, Daphne Flintroy and Carletta Jackson. I want to say welcome, and I'm going to turn it over to our committee chairs so that they can bring you the information and official welcome and make sure that you get everything that you are supposed to receive today. We have some very special guests, and I hope that you enjoy to the fullest. Take some good notes, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you. So our Flintroy.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining in to our Generational Wealth fourth session. You are in for a treat tonight. Tonight, we are honoring our Soror, Dr. Lisa Williams, who is the daughter of Soror Francis Smith. But the special treat is her husband, who she will introduce in a few minutes. They are a dynamic couple who have been doing things for several years in the area of generational wealth and traveling across the country and throughout. They were recently featured on the Tamron Hall show on April the 27th, and I understand that was a fantastic and exciting show. So sit back, relax, get your pen and paper, because you will get some great notes tonight about identity theft and also how to take care of your assets and protect them. I introduce to you Dr. Lisa Williams. Soror, Lisa.
Good evening, sorors. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, and welcome.
Well, hello, and it's always exciting to be with your sisters. And so tonight, I am super excited that you have an opportunity to get to meet someone that I kind of know a little bit about. But before I even begin to introduce him, I'm going to share my screen for the presentation, because this is going to be a real special treat. If you want to participate in the conversation, if you'd like to be a part of the dialogue and all that is going to happen in this training tonight, please either go to your desktop, your laptop, one of your devices, your phone, and type in either the web address, or you can scan the QR code that's on your screen. So someone give me a thumbs up. We're going to give you really maybe 1 or 2 minutes for folks to scan that QR code, log in. The questions, I got a thumbs up. All right, well, we're cooking with grease now. We definitely want you to take a moment and do this. You can also go to Slido, Slido.com. Slido.com, and they're going to ask you for a number, which will appear on the screen in just a moment. And as we go through the presentation, Mr. Williams D'Artagnan will have an opportunity to share with you some questions, etc. Let me tell you a little bit about this country boy. He is a self-described country boy from the big metropolis of St. Joe, Louisiana. Not the Queen Sugar, St. Josephine, but the actual St. Joseph, Louisiana, which is in Tensas Parish. He grew up in that area and has gone on to do some really amazing things. So what we want to do today is to have you hear from him and be able to ask whatever questions that you may have as you go into your Slido.com or you access the link. There are 2 different ways in which you can access. There is one way where you can ask questions. If a question comes up throughout the presentation, feel free to ask those. And then at the appropriate time during the Q&A, he will most definitely have an opportunity to answer all your questions. Also, for those of you, once the presentation is over, if you'd like to stay on with us, D'Artagnan actually had an opportunity to have a book documentary created on his Amazon best-selling memoir, The Master Identity Thief. And so that documentary we will show at the very end. It's about 18 minutes long, so we did not want to take up our presentation time with that. But for those of you who'd like to stay on to get a chance to watch the movie, then we invite you to stay for that. Let me just start by saying that Delta Sigma Theta was one of the first to invite D'Artagnan to present on his book idea at the time. He actually participated in an economic development presentation with us several years ago, if you remember. And someone in the audience said, "When are you going to get that book done?" And he said, "Next year." Well, it's next year, 5 years later. And we're excited because not only is it an Amazon bestseller, but Tamron Hall's staff in doing a show on identity theft actually came across Dee and had an opportunity to feature him on a recent episode. So if you missed that, please go online and check that out. Okay, well, I've taken up enough time to give you an opportunity to make sure your Slido ready to jump in. And I'm going to now turn it over to D'Artagnan Antoine Williams, who is the author of the Amazon bestseller, The Master Identity Thief. Sir?
Good evening, ladies.
Good evening.
Madam President, Madam Chairwoman, thank you. And thank you to the entire Delta organization for the opportunity to present on the subject matter of identity theft in the interest of protecting yourself and your assets. This evening, I want to relax the presentation because I intend for it to be fully didactic, both educational and entertaining. At the end of the segment, there's no question is a wrong question. I'm open to all questions because I'm an open book. I wrote a memoir and I intended to be very truthful and truly transparent. And tonight is going to provide or give you examples of the authenticity and the genuineness within which I intended to communicate my message, my story. So diving right into it, I understand Delta Sigma Theta to be an organization founded in 1913, somewhere's about, and intended to be disruptive and separating itself from an existing organization. Disruptive in terms of identifying and defining their views and values in the space of making them distinct and unique in terms of representing what femininity is and the dignity associated therewith in the space of higher education and higher learning. So I thought that by in understanding that, I thought it would only be right if I started this off with a pop quiz. So I have a question that I like to pose. We'll dive right into it to give you guys some time to answer, to interact, and understand some of the things that perhaps heretofore you do not. So first question is, how much do you really know about protecting yourself from identity theft? And what is identity theft? And what is an identity thief? So the answer to the question with regard to identity theft, I mean, depending on the source, you get various and multiple meanings, but very simply, identity theft occurs when someone uses another person's personal identifying information to commit fraud or other crimes. Essentially, in a nutshell, that is identity theft. And what are those personal identifiers? Let's qualify this question or the answer there too by understanding the essentials that are needed to steal one's identity?
SARS, I hope I'm still married after this presentation is over, but I was trying to run the slides for him on a separate machine. But in order for you to participate, he's gonna have to run on his. So give us a split second to get him set up.
No problem. And that's working in the world of the technology that we have. And I also just want to come back and say, welcome to everybody that we do see out there. I do see some of our regional leadership that is present, and we want to say thank you and welcome. I also see a couple of other members and young ladies that are joining us, and I see another gentleman. So again, I want to say welcome from all over, and know that Delta Sigma Theta is pushing and paving the way in economic development. And know that every time that you come to one of our presentations, you're going to walk away something and be stronger in the steps that you take. So if you're not able to completely watch this, you can always come back. And if you're watching it and you missed the note, it is available on our live stream on Facebook, as well as on our Baton Rouge Sigma YouTube page. So it will be available in the days to come. So as we transition, and I think we're almost there, and I just want to let you all know, Dr. Lisa, if you've heard, you can hear me. I have been using the link and I sent my comment. And if you didn't get an opportunity to scan the QR code, the link was placed into the chat. Yes. While we have a moment, just go on ahead and download that. Thank you, Sarah Lee.
Thank you. So let's take it from the top, ladies. How much did you know about identity theft, or rather protecting yourself from identity theft? That was the original question, and I offered it as a pop quiz to a group of women, what I believe to be educators. So I'll give you a second to ponder that, if you will, and then we'll go on into the answer segment of the pop quiz. Second question is, what is identity theft? And you can record your answers. Feel free to type them in, and then we'll unpack them as you contribute. Okay. Good answer. I think you may have heard me say that before. We had the technical difficulties, though.
I did not.
Stealing someone's information. Someone who uses other people's identity for self-benefit. That's a good start. Stealing someone's information. That's true, in part. When someone uses your identification to commit fraudulent activities. True. When someone gets my personal information and uses it. Essentially, all these answers are correct. But let's see if we can summarize them into a more simple definition for identity theft. So what is identity theft? Identity theft occurs when someone uses another person's personal identifying information to commit fraud or other crimes. Later on in the presentation, I'm going to differentiate in between identity theft and identity compromise, because the industry will have you to believe that they're one and the same, when in fact they're not. And when we get to that segment of the presentation, I'll differentiate between the two. Another question for you. Have you or someone you know had their identity stolen? Yes or no? Whoa, 67%, 86% answered yes, 14% no. So that speaks to the 88% has answered yes and 13% no. So there was an adjustment. And that simply speaks, 89% has answered yes and 10%, 90%. This response speaks to the commonality of identity theft. And those yes answers are steadily increasing. So what emotions did you or they experience as a result of their identities being stolen? Was it anger? Was it frustration? Was it hurt? Did you feel violated? Did you feel betrayed? What do you think some of the emotions, or what were some of the emotions when you had anger? Quite naturally, right? Violated. Fear, anger, and anxiety. Embarrassed, overwhelmed, despair, violated. Unsafe, sure. All those are real emotions as a result of identity theft. Well, you're not alone in feeling this way. There's some national statistics that we've been able to capture that I want to share with you to show the alignment or misalignment perhaps in between the results of the fallout, the aftermath as a result of identity theft. And here they are. Here's some national statistics. Emotional impact of identity theft. Common feelings of victims after an identity incident. And the question posed was, what emotions did you or they experience as a result of their feelings? Some of you responded and replied with anger and frustration. You were overwhelmed, you were embarrassed, you were hurt, you were violated, you were depressed, you were left in despair, you were ashamed, you were fearful as a result of someone being able to tap into your reality and tap into the secrecy and privacy of your life and compromise your credentials in such a way that you were victimized. So the national average in terms of anger and frustration is 85.71%. So that seems to me that to be a natural emotion to have as a result of having your identity stolen, right? Second to that is violated. People felt violated, and intruded upon, if you will, trespassed upon. And within, from a virtual context, whether it was cyber identity theft or socially, whether it was social identity theft, 83.7% of the victims that reported their emotional state after having been victimized by an identity thief was that they felt violated. And then someone following that, and third, they developed trust issues, began to second guess those who were held responsible with their credentials, their personal information, perhaps family members and friends, because most victims of identity theft don't know who stole their identity. Most. Some do, but most don't. Identity theft is one of those ghost crimes. People are lurking about your identity, credit profiles, personal profiles, seeking and searching opportunities and ways to exploit you, to steal your personal information for the purpose of monetizing that theft, that opportunity in the space of committing this crime. Fourth was they felt helpless, right? And that's where the fear factor comes in. Fear comes in the space of feeling alone and helpless in the absence of defense. So if you felt fear, you felt helpless, it was as a result of you not having protective measures in place prior to victimization. And the best protection against identity theft and any form of fraud, for that matter, in the space of commerce or the economy or economics, is consumer education. So you felt helpless and fearful as a result, that you did not know this crime or had you as a target, that you did not even know that you was a target or opportunity for victimization, when in fact we all are on a daily basis. Following fifth is depressed. Some people just don't know what to do as a result of being victimized by identity theft schemes and scams. So they pause and pivot in a place of depression. What do I do? How do I reclaim and regain my personal identity, my credentials? How do I take possession back of my life? How do I take over? How do I prevent this from happening? From happening again? And then not understanding how to do that leaves people in a state of despair and as such depression. So That too is a side effect or aftermath, if you will, of being victimized by identity theft. And all these feelings and emotions flux, right? So they happen in degrees and stages, just depending upon the gravity of the identity theft scheme and scam. And I'm going to dive deep here in this presentation in terms just to what length and just how deep, what depths an identity thief can arrive at, can achieve in terms of stealing your identity if they are determined. And if your qualifications and your criteria are attractive in such a way. Some people felt betrayed. Betrayal is also a natural emotion depending upon who perpetrates it against you. If it's a close individual whom you trusted, leave your purse around, leave your wallet around, and they access your credentials and compromise your information, then obviously betrayal is a natural emotional state to have in that regard. So what you're feeling is aligned with the national statistics as a result of having been victimized yourself or know someone who has been victimized by identity theft. So those are righteous feelings that meets out righteous retribution. Next question. What are the key personal identifiers needed to steal your identity? And I'll give you a clue. In answering this question, there are 5. And help me to satisfy the inquiry, if you will, by listing them here in the space. SSN, Social Security number and name. Those are 2 for starters, 2 out of 5. Anyone else? Social Security name and birthday. That's 3 out of 5. Address, that's 4 out of 5. One more. You're on a roll. Banking number. Name, Social Security number, birthday, address, date of birth. We're missing just one more. I haven't seen it populate yet. Email address and password. No. We're almost there though. We got 4 out of 5. Credit card info. Birthday. That's DOB. Banking number. Mother's maiden name. Oh, we're still not there yet. I'll give you a hint. We can find it on your driver's license. Number, place of work. License number, there we go. I see it. Okay, so what are the key personal identifiers needed to steal your identity? And when I speak of stealing your identity, I mean completely steal your identity in its entirety. Complete name, first and last name, sometimes in some cases, more specific and special cases, middle initial. SSN, Social Security number. Your driver's license / ID number. Date of birth, primary billing address. These are the 5 essentials that are needed to commit identity theft as defined previously in this presentation on an earlier slide. So these are the 5 essentials that are needed to steal your identity. And in understanding that, I want to differentiate between identity theft and identity compromise. Some of your answers were good, none of which were wrong in the larger scheme of things, but no pun intended. But your credit, your complete name, your Social Security number, your driver's license number, your ID number, date of birth, primary billing address are all examples when perpetrating identity theft can be considered as a compromised identity, but not all identity compromise is identity theft. For example, if you go to your favorite restaurant in town and a waiter comes and get your payment card, turns their back, go to the point of sale to transact, attend to that transaction to satisfy that receipt. But in the point of leaving you and on their way to the register, they pass it through a small device called a data collector or a skimmer, if you will. That's identity compromise. Your Social Security number, date of birth, billing address has nothing to do with that particular crime that was perpetrated in that instance. But your name and credit card number or payment card number, for that matter, has been compromised, if you will. Identity theft, on the other hand, is the adoption and implementation and using your Social Security number, date of birth, complete name, primary billing address, a mailing address, and driver's license / ID number in the perpetration or commission of a crime with the intent and purpose of taking over your identity in the space of either the instant credit market or for other means, intents, and purposes. So I wanted to make that distinction between the two, that all forms of identity theft is identity compromise, but not all examples of identity compromise is identity theft. So tell me, how long has identity theft been the fastest growing crime in America, do you think? 5 years or less, 10 years, 15 years, over 20 years, 100%. 15 years maybe. Okay, 15 years. Okay. Well, the majority has answered correctly. Identity theft has been the fastest growing crime for the last 23 consecutive years. Since 1998, at the introduction of the Identity Theft and Assumption Deterrence Act, or the Identity Theft Deterrence and Assumption Act, introduced by Congress in 1998, modified in 2004 at the instigation of the FBI because of the growing and alarming rate in terms of growth of identity theft schemes and scams in America. But identity theft has been on track and has steadily been scaling, if you will, in terms of being the fastest growing crime in America. And if you ask me, it has become a matter of national security. When we consider and look back on the 9/11 attacks, if you Google identity theft 9/11 Commission report, it will reference how identity theft was used by some of the 9/11 hijackers to gain access to the planes by use of fraudulent documents, and as part of committing this crime, and that heinous crime on our nation there, the Twin Towers of New York. So for the last 23 years, identity theft has been the fastest growing crime in America. So tell me, now that we know it's the fastest growing crime in America, on an annual basis, approximately how much money do you think is lost due to identity theft, fraud, and crimes that are associated therewith? Is it 500,000, 100 million, or over $1 billion? Okay, over $1 billion. So the majority has answered again in terms of over $1 billion. And on an annual basis, approximately $16.9 billion is lost annually due to identity theft related crimes. That's an alarming number in the United States of America. In this space and age of technological advancements, we think of password protections, passcode protections, but what people don't understand is that data is everywhere. Your personal data is everywhere. It's on social media. There are so many access points to your personal data that it's easy to capture and compromise that personal data. Even if perpetrators of identity thieves have to collect it from more than one resource, it can be brought together and ultimately compromised in a way in space of cyber identity theft. But to the point of the question, $16.9 billion is lost on an annual basis due to identity theft related crimes. Here's a good one. The elderly are victims of identity theft more than younger people. Is that true or false? true. So most people think that this is true, that the elderly are victims of identity theft more than young people. And it would seem so. But actually, it's false. Young people lose more money to fraud more often compared to older people, since 43% of identity theft instances happen to people from ages 20 to 29, while only 15% of them are aged 70 to 79. Now, I want to pull some statistics from my own experience as a former master identity thief. I do not entirely or wholeheartedly agree with this particular statistic, simply because when I was targeting victims of identity theft, I specifically and purposely targeted victims who were 45 years of age and older. And naturally, the question would be posed, why did you do that? Why didn't you target any identity that met the criteria for targeting and ultimate or subsequent consequent victimization? Well, when I thought about it, when I was in the field of operation, if you will, when I categorized potential victims from the age of 20 to 29, they were fiscally and financially unstable, still either in college, coming out of college, consumed and overwhelmed with student loan debt, had not yet discovered their identity, still in the midst of that identity crisis stage. Speaking for myself in that regard, having come to understand who I was only after the age of 31. So I knew that there was a lot of liability associated with that age group. Drowning in debt, student loan debt, credit card debt, and all kind of other debt that are needed, that not necessarily needed, but that are assumed, if you will, in an effort to stabilize one's life or the foundation thereof as they seek life beyond their college days and years, look to align themselves with a significant other and begin to build that family structure. So for me, age 20 to 29 was a distraction and a deterrent at one. So I went for 45 years of older because that represented a class, a case, if you will, like for lack of a better term, a category of individuals who were more stable, people who were career oriented, people who understood credit management, people who understood life structure. And as such, they were more attractive simply because of their stability, their career orientation, and how they had developed an appreciation for their finances. And I understood and targeted them based on credit scores alone. And I'll get into that here a little later on in the presentation. So this question here has both it is a false positive, if you will. It's true in the sense, or rather it's false in the sense that more young people are targeted as victims for identity theft. But the other side of that token is that the minority or the older people lose more in a single instance of identity theft than the younger individual, simply because their credit profiles, their credit limits, and all these things that they've established over a period of longevity situates them to be more liquid, if you will, or more credible in that space of identity theft perpetration. Identity theft by the numbers. 3 out of 5 people on tonight's presentation will be victims of identity theft. Either you have been or eventually will be. That's a very high statistic. We are at 75% capacity with this particular stat here. 3 out of 5 people will experience some form or type of identity theft eventually. Child identity theft affects 3 million children on an annual basis. That's a lot of children. And I'll get into children identity theft a little later on in the presentation and unpack it very specifically. 5 million deceased identities are stolen annually. Now, this here establishes the fact that identity theft reaches from the cradle to the grave or beyond the grave. I've never stolen a dead person's identity because I didn't see the value in that, but obviously some people do, to the tune of 5 million deceased people identities are stolen on an annual basis. That's alarming. And on average, identity theft finds a new victim every 2 seconds. 1, 2, somebody has been victimized. 3, 4, another victim, every 2 seconds. And we don't rate that here in America as a matter of national security. Why? I wonder. Yes, so identity theft. I wanted to give you some of my background, some of my story, and why I come to be an expert in this space, and why my focus has been consumer protection in terms of identity theft, payment card fraud, check fraud, forgery, and some other tricks of the trade that perpetrators, that thieves, that criminals use and adopt to victimize individuals. So identity theft, my story. My mom and dad is here in the background. I come from a 2-family home. We were raised in the church. My parents had religious values that were based on biblical principles. And interesting enough, very ironically, in the book of Genesis, chapter 25, verses 25 to 27, I will recall to your mind and memory the story of Jacob and Esau, Isaac and Rebekah, their parents, and how Rebekah and Jacob conspired to steal Esau's identity and subsequently, ultimately, his birthright. It's right there recorded in the same Bible that we all were raised upon, and it's still recorded in those pages and those angles of the Bible if you haven't torn them out. Jacob stole Esau's identity at the age of 14, 15, when you do the exegesis on that particular passage of scripture. And his mom actually conspired with him to do it because Jacob was the preferred child, or she showed partiality to Jacob more than she did Esau. And when you go and read that story, Genesis chapter 25, pick it up in verses 25 to 27, it records the account, the first archaic primitive account, historical account of identity theft perpetrated by Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel later on because he redirected his life, and as such had a need for change of the name with regard to the same. So yes, I was raised in the church, learned about that story in Sunday school, found it intriguing. I was reading the Bible, being taught righteousness and sanctification and holiness, but here it is, one of the 3 founding fathers of the Hebrew nation was an identity thief. I thought it was interesting, and as such pursued the theft of my parents' identities at the age of 15 years old. Yep, so I started with my dad's identity at the age of 15. At the age of 16, I stole my mom's identity. At the age of 17, I stole both grandmother's identities. And then at the age of 18, I stole both grandfather's identities. So I compromised my parents' identities and then both sets of grandparents. But I scaled the crime very gradually as I began to learn through trial and error what worked and what did not work. And I did this because in part, I came from a very rural Delta region of the state, Northeast Louisiana, city of St. Joseph by way of Tensau Parish. Ain't nothing up there but cotton fields and cornfields. Now, as a child, I didn't have that to do. I was raised in a very stable home. Dad was a sharecropper. Mom was a homemaker. Mom was a disciplinarian, and dad was more liberal. But I didn't have that to do. But I was influenced by this Capital One commercial. And at the time, their marketing slogan was purchase power. I mean, today Samuel L. Jackson asks the question very rhetorically, what's in your wallet? But in that day, it was purchase power. And I sought the purchase power that my dad held in his possession by way of a Capital One credit card that I ended up gaining access to when adding myself as an authorized user through trial and test calls by calling Capital One, seeing what credentials they're needed: name, social security number, date of birth, billing address, driver's license ID number in some instances. But to someone's point who posted mother's maiden name, that's a security feature in terms of gaining access into the account. And I had that because my grandmama, I was her favorite child. She actually put that in her obituary. I had it put in her obituary. So my parents were my tech subjects, and they were whom, my grandparents and parents rather, they were whom I used to test the waters to develop a 40-member enterprise in the space of identity theft. I won't get into the depths and details of that story, but I'll save that for the viewing at the end of this presentation. But nonetheless, I wanted to give you some background on me and why my focus as a best-selling author who decided to capture his memoir in the space of criminality as a former master identity thief. Now I want to delve into Identity Theft 201. We didn't pass Identity Theft 101. That's defining, or rather capturing and communicating the definition of identity theft. And I think we all did that collectively, those of us who contributed to the answers when the question was posed. We summarized it that essentially identity theft is stealing someone's personal information for the purpose of either accessing existing accounts, or creating new credentials to exploit their means and ability, their credibility in the space of commerce. But there are two categories of identity theft. Most people don't know that. Most people don't qualify identity theft in two categories. In most minds and understandings, identity theft is identity theft. But as I began to explore and experience identity theft, I began to study it at a very technical level, using both quantitative and qualitative research methods to perfect this crime at the age of 15 and expiring at the age of 25. So the two categories of identity theft are simply social identity theft, which requires us to employ social engineering. And then there's cyber identity theft. Social identity theft is when someone steals those 5 essentials or those credentials that's needed to not necessarily impersonate a personality, if you will, but to embody those credentials in the performance or commission of an actual identity theft crime. I've stolen Miss Daphne's personal information: name, social security number, date of birth, driver's license number, primary billing address, with the intent and purpose of either accessing existing accounts that she have, we call that account takeover, or creating new accounts unbeknownst to her in the perpetration and commission of that crime. In order to do that, not necessarily D'Artagnan, but one of my field recruits, a young lady whom I would identify that fits the description of a Miss Daphne, if you will, that has not necessarily her look or likeness, but understands that as a female, she needs to be able to express herself in a way that's reflective to what the credentials present in black and white. And if that credit score is 721 or beyond, then we're going to categorize Miss Daphne as a prospect from whom, or off of whom, we can make a minimum of $25,000 with a quota of $15,000 a day. That's social identity theft, social engineering at its finest. That's what we call social science. And I capture that and I expound on it in great detail in the second volume of The Master Identity Thief, spelling out the 7 characteristics of a social identity thief. Cyber identity theft is equivalent to cyber stalking. It exists in a place of cyberspace, essentially. And they have a couple names for it, some of which you might be familiar with, whether that's keystroking, capturing your keystrokes on your email. If I'm watching you through an unbeknown channel, I've tapped into your VPN into your computer, and I'm watching your keystrokes, capturing your passwords, capturing your passcodes in an effort to adopt them and use them against you unbeknownst to you. Phishing and vishing, ransomware, all of these are, and malware, all of these are malpractices, if you will, in the space of cyberspace and the perpetration of identity theft. So these are the two types of identity theft. It falls into one or two categories, either social identity theft via social engineering, or cyber identity theft via cyber stalking. This picture here that's next to social identity theft, does that look like me? I'm sorry, I gave you the answer. So I may as well just tell you where this picture comes from. This picture originates back from 2002, 2003, when I was in the height of my career as a master identity thief. This is a sketch that the Secret Service drew and put in the space of fraud prevention or Crime Stoppers. And they're seeking and searching for me from 2001 to 2003. I said 2003 to 2002, but actually from 2001 to 2003. This was a pictorial description of me when they had begun to investigate and close in on me in conjunction with the FBI, with the state police, with the Louisiana Bureau of Investigations. All unbeknownst to each of these agencies, they're all running independent investigations until Secret Service and FBI teamed up towards my arrest in 2003 in the month of February. The types of identity theft. On the previous slide, I said that there were 5 types of identity theft. The first of which I want to expound upon is suicidal identity theft. Suicidal identity theft found its origination around 2008. Well, I say origination, but found its height, met its height in 2008 when the market crashed, right? This is when we can stipulate a state of income and get a whole second home, whether we could afford it or not. The bubble burst, the market crashed, fell through, the housing market specifically, and everything came tumbling down. Well, people turned to the resources that were most immediate to them. In 2008, with a report coming out in February of 2009 by Job and Strategies and Research, 2008 marked a spike in identity theft like never before. The numbers were out the roof. Well, how? Not because there were individual independent identity thieves targeting victims, but people were exploiting their own accounts and reporting it as fraud. So they turned to the resources that were most immediate to them. And those resources offer the most immediate relief. So they max out their credit cards, they open up new accounts in their names and report these things as fraudulent. And even I was guilty of doing it as a college student. I would go to college, max out that Discover card. Discover and Capital One are the first two that we received. You max them out, and then you call and report it as stolen. So you can get a new card and you have a new zero limit where you don't even have intent on paying that, or at least I didn't at the time. But I knew the scheme, understood the scam very early on. And I knew that the spike in reported payment card fraud and identity theft crimes in 2008 was as a result of people turning to the resources most immediate to them to seek and search out relief, which were their own credentials, to create and establish new accounts and exploiting and maximizing their existing accounts. And that's what that was. And that is suicidal identity theft. When you use your own credentials, when you report fraudulently on your own accounts, saying that they were actually stolen when in fact they were not. Second type of identity theft, income tax identity theft. Income tax identity theft is not new. Began to gain industry attention around 2014 and has been spiking ever since. And this here is a race to file an income tax. The sooner you file your taxes, the more safeguarded you are. But if you're one of those that wait till the last minute deadline or get a deadline extension or file an extension, you're extending and creating the opportunity for exploitation and victimization of tax identity theft. There's a way to get ahead of it, and I'll show you that closer to the end of the presentation. But I do want you to know that if you are ever a victim of tax identity theft, as was my wife, it takes about a year to get that right. It takes about a year to get your refund. It takes about a year for you to get a personal identification number, a PIN they call it, for the purpose of protecting your tax identity files. Why they don't issue this number on the front end, I don't know. They wait to victimization only to issue it after the fact. And oftentimes you have to go into the local IRS office to validate that you are, in fact, who you say you are after you receive the PIN by way of email or through the actual mail system. So, but tax identity theft is a type, one of the 5 types of identity theft. Number 2 is medical identity theft. Now, medical identity theft has 2 forms, actually. One, someone can capture your medical number, medical ID, insurance benefits, and begin to exploit and take advantage of those benefits by use of your medical number, insurance number, etc. But the other form of medical identity theft is as I experienced it. I had people and personnel that worked in entire hospitals, public and private, whether it was in Monroe, Louisiana, or Baton Rouge, Louisiana, who worked in the administrative sector. And working in administration, they had access to the entire patient database files. So I would get that information downloaded and delivered to me for a nominal fee. And as such, be able to not necessarily compromise those identities for the sake of benefit of receiving medical benefits, but nonetheless, taking that information and converting it, if you will, into the space of commerce, what I call the field of operation, which had an itinerary in terms of identifying places and businesses that are targeted for exploitation. Here's an interesting one that little know about. Department of Transportation, FBI, knows a little something about it because they've just begun to take it up as a cause or a crime of interest. But nonetheless, this is a crime that I singularly committed in 2004, 2005, coming out of federal prison on my first sentence, only to return 9 months later in 2005 for a stint around a period of 6 years. But vehicular identity theft is essentially this. It is stealing the vehicular identity of your vehicle. We know the VIN number exists on your vehicle, on the dashboard, in the driver's side door on the sticker, in the trunk, under the motor. Those are the 4 places. I won't tell you what the 5th one is, but those are the 4 places that your vehicular identification number exists. But what is true vehicular identity theft? How can somebody steal the identity of my vehicle? Well, they simply steal the VIN number. And here's what I used to do in summary in terms of vehicular identity theft. When you go to autotrader.com, carmax.com, carrules.com, autonation.com, on these websites, all these vehicles for sale. Cars, boats, motorbikes, RVs, anything would have been them. But the mere fact that they are for sale, that means that they are not registered with anyone's Office of Motor Vehicle, Department of Transportation, or insurance company. That means that that number is very neutral and can be adopted, if you will, stolen, and put into a place in terms of a replicated document, whether it be a bill of sale, proving the sale, a replicated state title that's issued, a replicated insurance ID card. In fact, you want to get the real insurance, but under a stolen identity for the purpose of perpetrating a crime, because ultimately it leads to insurance fraud. And there are some other tricks there that I won't disclose here on a live recording or a live stream, but did want to speak and touch in part on vehicular identity theft and how it is the more subtle, gone in 60 seconds or less, that Nicolas Cage started in 2002. In that Hollywood blockbuster movie, but not stealing a physical car, not even stealing an identity and using a registration to go to the dealership to get duplicate keys and come back to steal a car. This here is a type of vehicular identity theft that exists solely in the space of cyberspace. The last one of the 5 is children identity theft, and it is perhaps the most heinous, nefarious, pernicious forms of them all. Children identity theft is essentially the stealing of a child's social security number without the hyphen marks. Now, the internet, if you will, and some financial services companies call these numbers credit privacy numbers, credit protection numbers, credit profile numbers. But the acronym form is CPNs. Some of you may have heard of, well, is it illegal to get a CPN? Or can I use a CPN instead of my own social security number to purchase a car, to purchase a house? I'll tell you the short answer, no. CPNs are illegal. There's nothing legal or strategic about them. There's nothing advisable about them unless you want to spend some time in federal prison. That's the only purpose that you would need. That's the only reason that you would need to adopt or take on the risk associated with a CPN. And essentially it is a child's social security number without the hyphen marks. CPNs are sold all over the internet. They're sold in packs of 5,000, 10,000, depending on the buyer's affordability and intent on profitability. It is the most heinous crime amongst the 5, and it is the fastest growing amongst the 5 in terms of identity theft, that particular type of identity theft that exists in the space of cyber, category of cyber identity theft. Yes. So we're nearing the end of the presentation. I wanted to share with you some information with regard to protecting yourselves, and this is my prevention prescription. You can bolster your authentication processes. We call that multi-factor authentication. And what that simply means, whether you're using Face ID and a password, that's 2-factor authentication. If you're using Face ID and a password and a passcode, that's 3-factor authentication. And that's what's suggested or advised here. Double layer up, double down in terms of protecting access to your information, whether that be your bank account, whether that be your medical records, whether that be your cell phone records, or whatever requires protection using a single factor or multi-factors of authentication. Employ multi-channel alerts to help prevent account takeovers. Now, an account takeover is simply an existing account. Like my dad, what I did was my dad's Capital One card, I took over the account. I contacted Capital One using his credentials, added myself as an authorized user, requested an additional card and accepted the card when it came in the mail and took over the account. I've seen that done. That's an old school trick, and that's really time consuming. I've seen identity thieves and have even perpetrated it myself, starting with my dad, but not ending up stopping there at how they take over accounts and have duplicate cards overnight at FedEx or UPS to that primary home billing address, only to intercept the UPS or FedEx driver to take possession or delivery of that card and go exploit it and max it out in a different direction. So, but to prevent that, and just employ multi-channels alerts to these accounts. And that alert should come by way of text, should come by way of email, should come by way of phone call. And just receive or set in the consumer profile settings the different ways in which you want to be alerted when your account, each and every time your account is signed into or accessed. Enable account alerts to notify you on unusual activities. And this is simply setting spending limits on your payment cards, or people logging in from a URL, a VPN, or an address, or a zip code for that matter, that the system is not used to or has no familiarity with. And we get that sometimes, especially if you're using an Apple computer, if you log into your email address and you're not on your home network Wi-Fi, your work Wi-Fi, Apple automatically sends you an alert asking you to verify or authenticate that it is in fact you signed into your email from an unfamiliar network. Plan a security freeze if you're planning to open an account anytime soon. And what that is contacting one of the three major credit bureaus, Experian, TransUnion, or Equifax. Setting your consumer credit profile either a credit freeze or fraud alert, or perhaps both. And that's what's advised. But as is, in fact, what some of these companies do when you give them the proxy, whether you sign up for a service of $9.99 credit money and identity theft protection on a monthly basis, $19.99 or $29.99, you're essentially giving them proxy to do what you can do yourselves, which is essentially contact one of the major credit bureaus on your behalf to set up these fraud alerts, set up these freezes in your personal credit profile. And here's what I would suggest and even advise: set up both a password and passcode. That's two factors. And anytime any creditor uses your credentials, specifically your name, social security number, and date of birth, to pull that credit report, they have to contact you through the means and methods that you've set up or established in your personal credit profile to verify the identity of who initiated that particular credit inquiry. Check credit reports at least 3 times a year. That's once a quarter. That's advisable. And nowadays with Credit Karma and some of the other high-level payment cards, they have these credit monitoring services that are built into their financial technology, whereby you can monitor your credit on a daily basis if you so desire. And it's more especially anytime you exceed a threshold that you set that's above 33% in terms of credit utilization. You get that alert and be reminded that you need to bring it back down to keep your score at a certain level at a certain point. Be responsible on social media and keep personal information personal. Just protect your privacy. Don't be as flippant. Don't ever give your credentials out to an incoming call to your cell phone or your home. What I used to do as an identity thief, I would already have the targeted victims' information because I had access to credit reports. My situation and setup was never a hit and miss type of situation. I always had someone working in either the banking institution or the automobile institution, whether that was a salesman or a GM, or even in law enforcement. I had police officers who can pull up behind your vehicle, run your license plate number, and give me a whole printout of you and your data profile at the end of his police shift. They worked for me, and I had access, that level of access to the targeted victims' information. And what I would do is essentially this. I would capture your information. I know your date of birth, I know your name, I know your social security number. But there's an American Express in this profile that I've already tried to get access to so I could change the billing address or the mailing address on it to have the account and the card redirected to me. But I do not know your mother's maiden name, or I do not know your pet's name. So what I would do is I would call you up and I will recite all your information back to you. Mr. Johnson, please. Mr. Johnson, how you doing? My name is Michael Smith. I'm calling from American Express Corporation today. How's your evening, sir? Great, thank you. Mr. Johnson, I just want to verify some information. Your social security number is 123456787. Is that correct? Yes, sir. Your date of birth is such and so. Is that correct? And your credit limit is $25,000. Yes, sir. Before we go any further and to access your account, Mr. Johnson Smith, I need your pet's name. Give it the information right up. That's in response to an incoming call. So it's advisable, never give your information out to a call that's incoming. I always say hang up and ask for a direct number and extension to which you can call them back. That's ABC to protecting yourself from account takeovers. Here are the resources. And these are the direct numbers to put that credit freeze or fraud alert in your credit profiles. Experian, Equifax, TransUnion. I've captured the direct numbers to those departments. If I were you, I would simply call them. You're going to go through an automated series, if you will, actually enter your social security number. The technology associated with these companies is going to match that social security number to whatever phone number or contact number you already have in your existing credit profile. And they're going to add that alert for 1 to 3 years or 3 to 7 years, depending on your preference and how long you want that measure of protection in place. And the thing about it, if you call one, they all share the information with each other. So you only really need to call one, but if I were you, I would multi-factor the authentication process and employ multi-layers of protections and just take the initiative to call all three. Is our Q&A session. And again, no question is a wrong question. And I'm open to answer any and all questions that are specific to the topic at hand. So question number one, are your parents still mad at you? See, in sharing this story, I think one of the challenges that people have is understanding the time span that has lapsed in between the origination in terms of when the crime committed and where I'm at now. Today, I'm 41 years of age. I stole my parents' identities at the age of 15. So in a Black household, obviously my mom was the disciplinarian. I got the whooping, I got the slap, I got the beat down. My dad intervened even then in protecting me, as most fathers perhaps would, if not altogether should. Thanks, Dad. No, my parents and I have a beautiful relationship. If you ask me, I'm the favorite child as the middle child. And when you look at the cover of my book, you look closely into the pupil of my eyes, and you'll see my mom and dad in my eyes, to whom I dedicate the book, and without whose love and forgiveness, that writing that book could not have been possible. Question number two, what did your mom say when she found out? Oh, so my mom wanted to call the police. The same thing that you should do if you ever find yourselves as victims of identity theft. The first thing to do is just call the police, because you need to get a police report. You're going to need that police report because it's going to be the guiding document of any investigations that follow as a result of that particular theft. But my mom did in fact want to call the police, and she had in fact called the police, but my dad pressed the phone button, the dial tone, whatever that button is, on the phone. That's when in the days of Bell South, and they were sending phones to the home, and call ID first came out. My dad hung it up, and we dealt with it in the household. Question number three, how long does it take to get your identity back to normal after it has been stolen? On average, 2 years. It's a 2-year process. After you get through disputing, both the charges and all the fraud that has been perpetrated in your name using your credentials. It's about a 2-year process. And the process of recovery after identity theft, do people find themselves filing bankruptcy? Yes and no. The people that find themselves in a state of despair and end up in depression have given up the fight and don't come out of it, have given up the fight. And as such, they think that their identities or the death thereof is so far gone that there's no way to recover. But there is a process of recovery, and the companies such as Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion spell these things out. Also, you can find information at the Federal Trade Commission, FTC. The federal government does a good job in terms of delineating steps of recovery from identity theft. And there's just a number of organizations that you should call at the point of discovery and victimization, starting with the local police, filing their police report, and then contacting one, if not all 3 of the major 3 credit bureaus. And then they're going to lead you into the different directions so as to erect a fence, if you will, around your identity relative to recovery. Okay. Next question. Wow. Did you repent, and how are you treated by others today now that you made public what you've done? That's a good question. So I've documented in my book, The Master Identity Thief, I've documented my repentance in 3 measures. We like to call it not necessarily redemption, but redemption. And that process for me entailed re-education, regeneration, and lifelong rehabilitation, because the only thing that I'm perfect at in life is being imperfect. I'll be the first one to announce that. But as it appreciates repentance, true repentance, having a spirit of penitence, having a contrite heart, having an afflicted soul, having both regret and remorse, the kind that turns you not necessarily 360 degrees, but that which positions you to make a 180-degree turn, to walk in a newness of life in a different direction. And as a student of scripture, understand repentance and atonements and those things that are associated therewith at a very profound level. And to the extent that I understand it in its simplicity, repentance is a thing of my reality. What other safety measures can be taken besides putting an alert on your credit profile? Again, I like to remind the audience that consumer education is the best type and kind of protection. I can sit here and tell you credit alerts, credit freezes, multi-factor authentication, all of these are parts and pieces to the process of protection. But educating yourself, getting ahead of the crime, living in the space of prevention and not necessarily reaction to victimization is perhaps the best position of protection that an identity can position itself. If you will, ladies, if you don't mind, you can unmute your mic and we can ask and address these questions live, and that way I don't have to figure my way out through the platform. Are there any questions? Any more questions? Any questions I didn't answer? Because I want to touch on any and every question that has been posed or asked, so that I don't leave any question unanswered, or at least make an effort to answer it. Any questions? Any questions?
Mr. Williams, you have a question on the
Simply
Facebook
unmute
chat.
your mic and let's deal with it. Let's treat it live.
There's a question from Facebook. How long was your prison sentence?
Delta Shy. I mean, I'm dressed in uniform. I don't have the right colors on. No question?
We do have a question on our Facebook Live. The question is, how long did you stay in prison?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, can you hear us?
Okay.
He can't hear us.
Oh. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
hear
can.
you.
Can you hear us?
I can now.
Awesome. A question on our Facebook. How long was your prison sentence?
Okay, good question. So I had two prison sentences. The first of which for white collar crime was 18 months, 16 months of which I served.
Now you're muted, Mr. Williams, you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now? How much did that, what did you last hear?
The last thing I heard was white collar crime.
Sure. So for conspiracy to commit identity theft, I received a federal prison of 18 months. And I did 16 months on that 18-month sentence. I came home in 2004. I stayed on the streets for a period of 9 months. But unbeknownst to most people, as I document in the book, is that I had two different revenue income streams, major revenue income streams. One of them was drug dealing, but the more lucrative amongst the two was white collar crime, specifically identity theft and credit card counterfeiting. So I was making more monies, made my first million at the age of 19, lost my last 3.1 million in cash at the age of 23. And making those monies, I came home and reacquainted myself after that 16-year federal prison sentence with some old acquaintances that had access, that were still in the streets, particularly drug dealing. And 9 months later, I caught a charge by the DEA, Middle District of Louisiana, and end up going to federal prison for conspiracy to distribute 2 counts of 500 grams or more of powder cocaine. That landed me with 6 years in federal prison for a total of approximately 8 years, with 9 months in between the two terms of imprisonment. Any other questions? I read one question where it said that it asked that had I made amends, had I paid restitution. I think by asking that question was whether or not I paid restitution. And my answer to it is that I paid restitution for the crimes that I was accused of and got caught for. And that was around $80-some thousand. But that was way back in 2003, 2004, 2005. I've been out of federal prison since 2011. Today we live in 2021. So those obligations have long been satisfied, if that satisfies your inquiry in that regard. And if I didn't understand your question correctly, please restate it and I'll attempt to satisfy.
There are no new questions in either chat.
So here's my book. I spoke with my parents being in the pupils of my eyes. That's my dad on the left and my mom on the right. You look at the blurb at the top of the book. I've been able to forge and develop a relationship with Frank Abagnale. Frank Abagnale is the subject of the movie Catch Me If You Can that came out in 2002, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks, where he was a master check forger. And he has offered a blurb in my book after reading my story and coming to see the similarities that we share between our experiences as former masters of our craft. That book is available either through that QR code or Amazon.com. And if you purchase it, I will be willing to meet you at the Delta Sigma Theta House on Southern University campus at a date to be coordinated, sign it in person, and then we can actually have a book discussion to dive more deeply into the book and some of my experiences as a former master identity thief, and some of the appreciations that I've gained along the way in terms of fraud prevention, detection, detainment, and deterrent. Well, that concludes my presentation. If there are no more questions for me, I think what follows after this is the 18-minute book documentary. It's going to give you some insight. It's going to establish context for reading the book. My parents are featured therein. Some of my former partners in crime that worked up under my leadership and direction are therein. Some community members that aided and abetted the perpetration of the crime unbeknownst to them are featured therein. Everything is true. And if anything, I withheld some information for obvious reasons, but that with which I was most comfortable sharing, I've disclosed in the memoir of the Master Identity Thief. And ladies, again, I want to thank you for creating this opportunity, for erecting this platform for me to share my story, and in so doing, talk, testify, and tell somebody about the good graces that God has afforded me to give me a second chance at life. I'm a proponent and champion of second chances, understanding all the hell and high water that I've undergone and went through myself. And I look to give and extend the olive branch to those who find themselves in the situations in which I once occupied or coming out of the situations in which I once resided. So having said that, I wanted to give a shout out and thank you ladies for enduring this presentation. I hope to have shared something of merit, of benefit, of value. I wanted to thank again, Madam President and Madam Chairwoman. Thank my wife, Dr. Lisa, for her representation. She always comes from a place of what I believe to be biased, but nonetheless, I hope and aspire to live up to those appreciations and expectations. Again, thank you guys. I want to conclude by saying I'm looking forward to meeting you in person someday, hopefully, and let's keep working because we're working. Thank you.
So Ross, for the opportunity for Dee to participate. We're in the same room, and so it's going to be some feedback. But I just wanted to say thank you. You do not want to miss the documentary. It's really good. I also want to thank my mom, Frances Smith, who is bouncing a baby in Atlanta, and so her camera's not on. But thank you, and we're happy to have any questions offline.
At the age of 15 years old, starting with my father, I stole my parents' identities. And after my parents were their parents, and after having stole both sets of grandparents' identities, your identity, America, was next. As I scaled my identity theft crimes to mastery, I amassed and assembled a 40-member organization that evolved into an enterprise that perpetrated fraud in untold millions. as I discovered then, and so it remains now. The opportunities in identity theft are endless. At the culmination of it all and at the conclusion of the matter, I asked myself, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world? What then is the true measure of a man?
What is the measure of a man? Is it determined by the money he makes or the car he drives? When we think of our lives, will it be determined by the road we take or the bridges we have to cross in life? When we sit and think of what we are and what we want to become, where does it all start? For D'Artagnan, it started in the small town of St. Joseph, Louisiana, often called St. Joe in the rural areas of Tensas Parish.
When I came to the town, it was beautiful to a certain extent. Plantation system, lots of people. On the weekends, most of the rural people would come into town and celebrate. Downtown, we had a Western Auto, 3 car dealerships. Of course, nowadays, just about all of that is gone.
Our parish school population is so small. We have probably fewer children than any other parish in the whole state. And the funding for each parish's education is based on the number of students that they have. As our population decreases every year, so does our funding.
As a young boy, D'Artagnan was curious, defiant, and extremely inquisitive. He grew up in a poor community, made up of farmers with very few resources for young people.
There was nothing for the children to do after school. Nothing. Just play in the streets, that's it. We did not have big money to spend on extra things. We had textbooks. They were old textbooks.
There were most of the people that's in the parish lived in the rural areas. They were sharecroppers, a few landowners.
Life for D'Artagnan was a systematic setup, guiding him to an underpaid career in the hot summer days of the cotton fields. Black kids picking white gold for successors of slave plantations from past generations. D'Artagnan loved his family and looked up to his father, who provided what he could for his family by working long hours in the cotton fields, to mowing lawns.
I was on the lake mowing yards. That's the next thing I did to make a living, because LSU was really paying me a whole lot of money.
D'Artagnan's parents promoted and pushed their kids to have a relationship with the Lord. They did so by attending and participating in church.
As a little boy, coming to Sunday school, naughty, but sweet. And he was here every Sunday, probably had no choice.
D'Artagnan looked up to his father, but he also wanted to do things differently. Determined to distance himself from the cotton fields, D'Artagnan began a new hustle. D'Artagnan would often inquire about life outside of St. Joseph, from reading books to talking to anyone that would teach him a new way to live.
And so by us coming from the same little small hometown, we homeboys. So he was like my younger homeboy. In other words, he was a younger protege of me. He used to come to me and used to say, KB, man, how can I make $1 million like y'all did? coming up, because, you know, we was in the game, you know, even though coming from a little small town, and we really ain't have that much resources, you know, at all. There's nothing up there but hunting, fishing, soybeans, and cotton. If you wasn't farming and driving a tractor or nothing, you know, you ain't had no work.
He admired his parents, but he wanted more resources and needed the money to fund his ideas. So he made a decision.
I guess that's when this game started. He would come in and say, I need you to run a copy of this off of me. I need you to run a copy of this off. No wonder, where are you getting a copy of people's driver's license, this and that, you know.
I've caught him several times to be crawling on the floor and going around inside the bed to go in his daddy's pants pocket.
I found out that he had used a credit card, and also he had used a credit card up through here, and the bank had called and said Capital One wanted to know who's making these charges.
But what I did was I called all the kids in the kitchen, and I asked the question, who stole the Capital One card and spent it? And all of them were like, not me, Mama. You know it wasn't me. Max said, Linda, didn't now one of them children steal that Capital One card? I'm like, well, then who took it then if they didn't, nobody stole it? He said, I don't know, but didn't now one of them steal it? You can look at them and tell, didn't now one of them steal it? I said, yes, it did. D'Artagnan looks guilty to me. And he said, man, did you steal a Capital One card? Dad said, no, Daddy. I said, I'm going to ask you, D'Artagnan, again, and I want the truth. Did you steal the Capital One card? Because I'm going to tell you A up either way it goes, so you may as well tell me. And he said, yeah, he did. So when Capital One called and asked if we knew who did it, he pushed the hang up button. His daddy did that. So he said, I said, what did you do that for? He said, Linda, you're gonna make them children, they're gonna send the boy to jail. What you think you're doing? I said, well, Mac, if he go now, then you can save him later.
D'Artagnan's desire for a new life begun in Duck Pond, the place where he formulated several dark strategies to move him out of his current circumstances.
He wanted to make $1 million, so he wanted, instead of, you know, I think he was a pretty smart kid, but you know, everybody wants fast money. So he wanted some money. So that's pretty much how we first got started. So he wanted, you know, like copycat what we did. Or in other words, he wanted to do it better than we did. He wanted to be better and bigger than we were.
Back then, he thought he was the man, you know, like say me and him had our run-ins, you know. He was from downtown, out from uptown, you know, and he used to tell us, you know, hey man, don't let me catch you downtown, you know, you gonna do this and do that too. I said, man, look, man, I'm from St. Joe, I can go anywhere I wanna go.
One time I was like in Missouri, and he called me up. He say, yo, KB, man, you wanna make like 10 grand? I said, wait a minute, that's a trick question. We made like, we should make like stupid money. We go out and make like $7,000 a day, easy. $10,000 a day. I mean, in 6 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, you know, doing different identity theft things.
He was down in Hammond, Louisiana, bought a $5,000 television.
That, though, was also called a modern-day Robin Hood. Now, he give to the church out of this money that he hustling money. He'd do for people. He would do that. He'd help people. He'd pay bills. He'd give the church donations all the time. And if you was close to him, he gonna take care of you.
D'Artagnan wanted to prove that he was somebody, and he wanted to come up and make money, no matter the price.
Everybody say the same thing. Man, that Doc, he's something serious. He's smart as a weird. I'm serious. They used to say, you know, he got his little legacy. You know, he had his own little legacy. You know, he come up like you know, like B12. He blew up like B12. I'm trying to tell you, one minute he was here, the next minute he was on top.
I looked up to him, you know what I'm saying, what he was doing, you know, but I knew it wasn't no good thing, but hey, the only thing I can tell him, man, is just be careful out there, you know.
In this life, we often see how a person can get wrapped up in a world of easy money that seems full of fun without regard until everything starts to catch up with you. D'Artagnan was that person, and it came time for him to make amends.
I had to grow up and learn the right way to do it, the right way to go through life. Because if you're going wrong, you're gonna catch up with you.
It was coming to a point that D'Artagnan was getting caught up with. He was in and out of jail. He was in and out of jail, and the 6 years he got, I thought he deserved it, because what really made me mad with him when I found out you had done this kind of stuff to so many other people, and I know how I felt about it, and I could imagine how they felt about it. So I had no remorse of him going to prison for it. None. No, I didn't.
We supposed to live by faith, not by sight. And so you got to see the best in a person, not the worst. No matter what a person does, you're supposed to look for the best. You know, there's a silver lining. Everybody got something good about them.
The road to redemption. The road is based on forgiveness, repentance, a determination to do better, and live for a higher purpose.
First of all, he a God person now, you know, I noticed that, you know, he loved God now, he spiritual, and everything, he done changed his ways. Things he used to do, he don't do no more, so that's a good thing.
And I'm proud of D'Artagnan, and I'm really proud of him. I'm really proud of him, and he does what he say. It might take a little while, but he does what he say he's going to do. And I pray that he continue on the straight and narrow path.
Keep your eyes focused on good and not evil. You know, and I know he can do it because I told you, he's very, very smart.
I'm just so proud of him for not for what he did, but for seeing that what he did was wrong and for making amends for it.
The thing that has power to condemn you, and God takes that and uses it for your strength.
What is the measure of a man? As we look over D'Artagnan's life and what makes or breaks someone, let's remember that we must all decide what path to take and the legacy and impact we want to leave for the future.
The book's completion and publication is my life's biggest achievement and accomplishment, second to my children. Starting with Caleb Carmichael, pivoting at Madison, Marie, and Darquez Noel, and Imani, Janae Marie. I intend to impress and impact them the way in which my parents has impressed and impacted me, by teaching them sound instruction and providing for them a good education so that they may make the better decisions in life, or at least have an opportunity to make informed decisions based on Dad's past faults, flaws, and failures. So what does the future hold for DEW? Well, my future has 3 lanes. One lane is education. The second lane is entrepreneurship. And the third lane is evangelism, so as to educate the masses, inform the general public about identity theft and all of its facets and forms, and the ways in which they can protect themselves or guard against it by way of education. A working education, if you will, not just an informing and having education for education's sake, but having a working knowledge that's preventative and protective. Entrepreneurship. I have a different perspective on entrepreneurship than perhaps most. I intend to press the accelerator and pursue some entrepreneurial aspirations that I've set both in my immediate and distant future. Evangelism. Scripture says that woe is unto them who preach not the gospel.
And I've been gifted and given enough from Genesis 1:1 to Revelations 22 and 21, pivoting in the book of Malachi, so as to share something that might save a soul from sin and ultimate destruction. I got to go to work, and my future is bright. It is a future that has brilliance in it that's awaiting for me to arrive into it. And I am desperate to engage it. I have to get out in the ditches and trenches to inform and educate people. I have to offer myself as a type of sacrificial lamb. And in some measure, I've done that, and I've intended to do that with the publication of this book. Not only do I want this book to be used as a tool, as a document to give praise, honor, and glory unto the Ancient of Days, but it is needful and quite necessary to educate a succeeding generation, be it a collegiate community, be it a law enforcement community, be it a legislative community. This book, I wrote it in such a way whereby they can share in the obligation in terms of holding and having seats and powers and authorities to safeguard a community, a country, if you will, against the advancement and acceleration of identity theft that ain't waiting on nobody.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed.
Thank you, guys. That was awesome. Great information. The video itself was truly very good and touching. I just want to say to you, keep soaring, keep sharing your testimony, your knowledge, and just know, no matter what, the most important thing sometimes is that when we share our stories for the good of all, no matter how we got there or why we got there, that is what is the best thing to do. So for those of you who participated tonight, it was an awesome experience. I love the interactive session. But know this, you've learned a lot tonight. So as they say, you didn't know, but now you know. So let's do what we need to do in order to protect ourselves, and definitely reach out, get the book, because I am sure there's a whole lot more information in it. Thanks again for joining us and participating in this generational wealth session. Look forward to May 27th, when we will have another very informative session on an African-American gentleman who has started his own oil and gas business. Have a great evening, everyone, and take care.
Everyone, before you leave, we have a survey in the chat. So please take some time